Look at how fast that ran. I wish I could have had that up the whole time. But look at up here. Look at this. How many seconds has it been? And in particular, we want to watch these maximum numbers down this column right here. This column of these are going to record any maximum number and hold it there. This column is showing our current temperatures. So the column on the left, current temperatures. Column on the right, maximum temperatures reached. Column in the middle are the minimum temperatures reached. And the column on the far right here is the average. So I'm really interested at this number. Take a look at that number. When you see the number is in red, red is not good. And that's the factory heatsink. So I don't want to run this any longer. It didn't take long. I think you got the message. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop Prime 95, and then we'll see those temps drop really, really quickly. Let's close that. It's hidden back here. Let me move this all the way over here. And let me see if I can bring up our temperature again. Minimizing to my system tray. All right. Now you'll watch how rapidly these temperatures decline when I hit stop and then hit OK. Now Prime 95 is stopped. And these numbers are going to go back to a regular number. So, I mean, if you never push the computer hard, I guess this is only going to rarely ever overheat. But if you're a regular user and you want to do things like Photoshop or video editing or, I don't know, even playing some games, which is what it's designed to do, some of those games can be pretty resource intensive. And then it's going to throttle, and then your game's going to stutter, and you're not going to be a happy camper. So let me go ahead and close this down. And let me take the heatsink off and reapply it again, just to see if that makes any difference. Look how quick this heats up. Boom, we're already in the red that quickly. So there's something called this precision boost overdrive, and Intel has their version of it too, where it is essentially overclocking the CPU for us. That's why overclocking is kind of a dead hobbyist thing. Like, some people still do it, but for the most part, you're already, the CPU and the motherboard, well, it's the motherboard, is already overclocking it for you. Now, if AMD is telling us this is a normal operation and nothing to be concerned about, I would say your heatsink is inadequate. Steve Mercure says it was 10 seconds by his count that re-hit temperatures in the red. All right, so here's what I want to do. I want to find PBO in the BIOS and turn it off. See if that makes any difference. So we'll stop this. Oh, did I stop it? Yes, I did. Temperatures are dropping. All right, we'll close it out. Shut it down. And this time when I reboot, I'm going to go into the BIOS. Now, it's not crashing, but I'm also nervous about letting it continue to run at those temps. And of course, the fan is ramping up. So now that we're here in the BIOS, somewhere in here, there's our throttling limit, performance preset, PBO enabled. PBO, oh, this is interesting. We can tell PBO to limit it to 85 with a negative 20 millivolts. Well, that's pretty darn cool. But you see how this is set to auto? I don't know how it's determining that 95 is okay. I don't get that. So let's set it to the minimal, which is, if we reduce it, well, I want to have the least impact on performance. So that's going to be right there with PBO and Tjmax at 85C. That would be what I consider probably negligible with regards to noticing any performance difference in theory. Now, the minute we start subtracting some voltage, even if it's millivolts, it's likely going to have an impact on performance. And the further down we go down this list, the more of a performance hit we're going to take. So I want to go just to the first option for the lowest hit performance, the lowest hit on performance. So we're going to select that. You can see I'm running at DDR5 6400, which is what this RAM is rated at, and that's working perfectly. And we're going to save and exit, and we're going to repeat these changes, okay? And start. Now, let's see what difference, if any, that this change has made. So at 83, we're okay. There's 85. It should stay at 85 and should not exceed 85, in theory. So as long as we don't see 86, so 85 point something is okay, according to what I'm interpreting from the BIOS. Now, I'm the kind of guy that when I build systems, I don't want to have to manually make changes in the BIOS that I end up selling to a customer and have the customer reset something, or I have to reset something. And I didn't remember that I had to do that for that one system for that one customer. It's out of the norm. So let's say the customer gets a BIOS update on their own, or for whatever reason, they've made some changes and the BIOS gets reset. Maybe the CMOS battery dies in time. It happens. Okay. Customer calls me. I go out there. I fix the CMOS battery, or I get a call that the system's starting to overheat now after a BIOS update. And I have to figure out, is something wrong with the heat sink? Is something wrong with the thermal compound? And you know what I'm not thinking of? That there's a setting in the BIOS by default that's getting it too hot. So then I would have to have a system in place where I leave special notes, or I leave notes specific to a customer, which is, I don't do that. All the customers are treated the same. All the hardware is done the same. It's much less confusing, and it's much easier to support customers. So when a customer has something different from everybody else, then I have to know that. I have to remember it. I have to have a way to pull that information back, because I will have long forgotten about this as I've moved on helping other clients. And it'll be like, oh, you've got to change the PBO setting in the BIOS from the default. You've got to be kidding me. And that's not an easy thing to walk a customer through over the phone. They don't know what a BIOS is. They never hit the key at the right time, and I can't see it remotely. So, how does that tell you how I feel? Maybe a different motherboard using the same chip wouldn't run it that hot. But I'd like to see that at least the BIOS is doing what it said it would do. The fan is also quieter. And that resolves my concern regarding the throttle or the heat. It didn't throttle. It just got really hot, and I was uncomfortable with that heat. AMD says you don't need to worry, 95 is fine. And based on the BIOS information, it won't let it get hotter than 95. We could have left it. Now that I have seen the BIOS, we could have left that alone. And the BIOS was saying, okay, I'm going to let it get to 95, and that's perfectly acceptable. Isn't that interesting? So what that's telling you is, when you're seeing that temperature climb and you're like, oh no, I'm at 95, there's only 5 degrees left before it thermal throttles. That's getting awful close to the ceiling. That's a little too close for comfort. I better shut it down before that happens. Well, it turns out with this motherboard, it won't let that happen. It's going to keep it at 95. Just like it's keeping it at 85, it will have kept it at 95 the whole time. So we could put that back to auto, but we will also hear a louder fan. And for those of us not used to temps that high, that might just make you uncomfortable and have some anxiety. If you're new to computers and you don't know the difference, ignorance is bliss, and it'll likely be okay. So AMD is saying 95 is perfectly fine and nothing to fix. I am gobsmacked. Will running it at 95, sorry, I was getting another Gatorade. Will running this at 95 over time reduce the life of that chip? I'm going to guess it will. But I'm also going to guess AMD doesn't expect you to have this chip more than 5 or 6 years, tops. If they want to sell you another chip, why do you think they keep coming out with new chips? That in 5 or 6 years, you're going to look at this chip and go, ugh, why do I still have this old chip? You know, compared to what's out today, this thing's a dog. And as long as the motherboard, you know, AMD's been really good about honoring socket compatibility. So there's a chance, maybe not in 5 or 6 years, but maybe in 3 or 4 years, a brand new AMD chip comes out that you can slot right in there and get a whole new level of performance. And ideally, Gen 5 will be enabled without having to change anything else. I mean, in theory, you could just get a different AMD chip, not an 8000 series, and have Gen 5 enabled today. Matt wants to know, what about it burning up the motherboard? No, the motherboard, so the motherboard manufacturers and AMD work together. So the motherboard BIOS isn't going to offer you this ability to lock it in at 95 degrees Celsius unless they've got the heat sinks over the VRMs, the voltage regulator modules. These are pretty beefy on this motherboard. I don't normally pay attention to that because I'm not an overclocker, but think of PBO as overclocking for you. And the motherboard is monitoring everything, not just the CPU. It's monitoring its VRMs as well. And the engineers have designed the VRMs so that there won't be any issue. Now, if you went back to an older motherboard and you slotted one of these AMD 5 CPUs in theory, with a BIOS update that may be required, that motherboard may not allow that chip to get to 95. If the engineers who designed that board, say 2 years ago, or however old the AM5 socket is at this point, never designed it for those kind of temperatures, they'll lock that into the BIOS. So in either case, you won't have an issue of the motherboard burning up per se, but you may have lower performance on an older board specifically for that reason. So there you go. It's locked in at 85. It will not exceed that. And likewise, when it was set to auto, it's going to lock in at 95 and it's going to leave it there. And it says, don't worry about it. And at 95, we're going to get a little more performance out of this. The fan's also going to get a little louder. And the lifespan of the CPU is likely not going to be affected by warranty. So as long as the CPU outlives the warranty, who cares? So if the warranty on the CPU is 2 or 3 years, running it at 95 consistently for that warranty period, it's going to run just fine. And after that, hey, if it burns up, if it wears out, it's time to buy a new one. That's the way the manufacturers typically, I'm not going to say that's what this manufacturer is thinking, but that's likely something similar to what they're thinking. They don't want to just sell you one CPU. They want you to come back and buy another one. And they're going to give you reasons. Hey, this one can do more. This one can have features and do things that the other one can't. Oh, and if your CPU should happen to fail because you've been running it hot for the last 5 years, well, you won't feel too bad about it. It's a good excuse to make your system better than it ever was before, right? Every way you look at it, it's positive when you're the manufacturer. You might be scratching your head and wasting a lot of time buying a more expensive cooler, buying more expensive thermal paste, and you're pulling your hair out going, I can't get these temps down. How mad are you going to be after all that time and money invested to get 0 results? Or effectively, this thing's going to climb right back up to 85 again because it can. So the more we cool it, the more power it's going to throw at it until it hits 85 potentially. So in theory, even with the biggest cooler on this, this will still likely climb to 85 as we've got it set and stop there. I mean, I'd have to test it to prove that theory, but that's certainly what it appears because it's holding back at 85. And when it hits 95, it's holding back at 95. You understand that, right? It's holding itself back. So even with the best cooler we can put on this, it looks like it could climb even higher in performance and voltage that it's throwing at it to hit these temperatures. because there's more there to be had, and it's reserving itself. It's holding itself back. Think about that. And David Graham says, well, it turned out to be okay after all. Well, is it? Is it? I think whether or not that's okay isn't necessarily fact. I think that it's an opinion. If you think it's okay, once again, David, it seems like there's this one-sided, tunnel vision. And what I'm trying to emphasize here on the channel is there's often not a one-size-fits-all answer. For people that have different needs, different expectations, different budgets, and different tolerances, a fan getting that loud because the temperatures are running that loud may drive somebody mad. And for them, it's not okay. From the manufacturer's perspective, it is okay. But the manufacturer might also say that for everything they do, just as a boilerplate response to prevent getting sued and admitting any wrongdoing. In this case, that's not the situation, but in this case, it feels a little desperate. What they're basically saying, here's what I'm hearing as a tech. I'm hearing the company say, we can't compete with Intel unless we push our processors to the edge, generating far more heat than what would be considered normal in the industry. That's what I see. And if you ask me, is that okay? I'm going to say that's desperate. Is desperation okay at these prices when you've got something else for a similar price that doesn't have this issue? I don't think it's okay. No. But is it going to cause a fire? Is it detrimental to the system? Time will tell. But at this point right now, it's too early to know the answer to that. So is it a problem to be fixed? Well, not by you or me. As I mentioned, if you're spending a lot of money trying to cool this chip and you're getting nowhere, wondering what you're doing wrong or what's wrong with your equipment, it's nothing, potentially, it's nothing you can fix at any price other than don't use this hardware. If you're of that personality type that's going to bother you, stay away from this platform. If you're of the personality type that you don't care as long as you get that added performance, then do buy this platform. Allow people to decide for themselves. And I want to encourage all of you to decide for yourself. But if you didn't have this information, how would you know any better? And that's it. That's the point of the show. That's going to wrap it up for me for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for your support, your kindness. And thank you to Patrick over at Serve the Home for loaning us the equipment. Until next time, bye for now.